the wall that keeps you from really connecting, and I say the really connecting, but reality is it could be the wall that keeps you from succeeding, the wall that really prevents you from accomplishing what you want to accomplish, is what we're going to be talking about today here on the Speaking Get What You Want podcast. Francis, great to be with you again.
Great to be here. And I'll tell you right now, right off the bat, the wall that you're talking about is vulnerability, or I should say a lack of
Right.
vulnerability.
It's crazy because we live in a world where people are increasingly hesitant to be vulnerable. Why?
It's an interesting thing because vulnerability, I think there's maybe a fundamental misunderstanding of what that actually means. I had a mentor once, Elizabeth Pitt, and she talked about vulnerability. I said, I'm vulnerable. I cry and, those coffee commercials. And, when a dog commercial comes on and Sarah McLachlan's singing, a tear comes to my eye. I said, I'm vulnerable. And she's like, that's not what I mean by vulnerability. And so when she talked to me about vulnerability, I'm like, oh, well, I don't know that I am. Like vulnerability, the ability to be vulnerable is just you're opening yourself up and you are laying yourself bare and you're making yourself available to anybody. And that you feel like, oh, I'll do that as long as I know that it's going to be positive. I'll do that as long as I know people are going to say good things. That's not being vulnerable. That's being vulnerable is taking risks. That's where the real joy in life lives. They're opposites, and you talk about you can't have joy without pain and suffering. You can't have hot without cold, and like there's a yin and a yang to it. And vulnerability, you can't enjoy the joy and peace that comes from someone saying that was so unbelievable if you aren't also willing to accept that someone might think that it was terrible, and you close yourself off from that. You say, well, I'm going to shield myself from that. And it's human nature. Like, listen, I'm not being critical of people that do it, because we all do it at some level or another. But the sooner we recognize that vulnerability, being vulnerable, that's when we can really jump forward.
Well,
man.
but the irony, Francis, is people think, okay, I don't want to be vulnerable because I don't want to be perceived as not smart, or I don't want to be
Right.
perceived as a failure. But what's interesting about that, years ago, Francis, I was in the financial service industry, and I didn't know much. I was pretty new. So I brought in this really savvy financial advisor to meet with me in a large company. There were probably eight individuals sitting around the table. Well, the person that referred me sat amongst those eight. And this individual that I was with started explaining how he was going to structure their financial plan. And he was using jargon and words, Francis, I had no clue. I was in the industry. I had no clue what he was saying, right? And all these guys sitting around the table were nodding their head. And I was like, there's no way. They all know what they're. But then the one individual, Chance, is the one who referred me. Chance goes, hey, I don't understand what you're saying. What does that mean? And and the irony, Francis, is in my mind, I thought that's the smartest guy in the room. Even though everyone else pretended to know what he was talking about, he was the one that was brave enough, or as you would say, vulnerable enough to say, I don't understand that. What does that mean? And so no one else wanted to say it. Everyone's just nodding their heads. Oh yeah, I know exactly I know that tax code. I know that, and I'm like, you don't have any clue. I don't have any clue. But then Chance is like, could you explain that a little more? That makes no sense to me. And I immediately thought, wow, he's the smartest one in this room. And so vulnerability, we're afraid to show it because we're going to be perceived as less smart or less valuable. But in reality, it actually increases your value.
Yeah, in that situation, that is really insightful, because it really is important for you to recognize vulnerability. There's two types of people. The kind of person that's going to be critical because you're vulnerable, and the kind of person that's going to be like complimentary or be impressed that you are vulnerable. And the person that's going to be critical that you are vulnerable, you don't really want in your life anyway. You don't want someone that is going to be like, well, what a moron. Why would he ask that question? I knew what that was, even if I didn't, right? So it really is interesting because we deny ourselves the opportunity to grow because we don't want to be vulnerable, because we don't want people who we shouldn't really care about anyway to be critical of us. And it's just that self-preservation mechanism. You have to have some level of confidence, but that all comes back to vulnerability. You have to be willing to be wrong. You have to be willing to look dumb. You have to be willing to, be whatever. And, people on this, that watching this don't know, I have a twin brother. We're identical twins. And both of us sang in choirs, but I always thought it'd be really fun to be in a play. And my brother, he thought it would be fun to be in a play as well. And I never tried it. I never tried out. I never tried to do it because I didn't want to look stupid. I didn't. What would happen if I went on stage and no one laughed at
Right.
my jokes, or I messed up a line, or I looked dumb or whatever? Thomas, he never cared. He never cared. He was always the guy, I'll go for it. What's the worst that can happen? Like that is a massive mindset. Like that puts you so much farther ahead than other people. You have to be willing to look dumb. You have to be willing to be wrong, to get it wrong, to not get it perfect. And when I can do that, I am so
Hmm.
much better off.
Yes.
Like I was asked to sing a solo in church, and I'm like, I don't like singing solos because there's this person that I don't really get along with, and if I mess up, she's going to be like, "You're an idiot. You screwed up." And until I could convince myself that it doesn't matter what she thinks, all I need to do is the best that I can do in that moment, and I'm okay with that. And the minute I thought that, man, the pressure went away, and it was like, listen, I'm just going to do the best I can in that particular moment. I always say, one of these days I'm going to write a book. I'm never going to do it, but one of these days I'm going to write a book. And the name of that book is going to be that the pursuit of perfection is the enemy to happiness,
Ooh.
because this idea that we have to be perfect is unattainable and is unsustainable, right? It's the pursuit of that. Well, if I can just be a little bit more this or a little bit less that, then I'll be happy. That, like, be perfect in the moment. Be perfect in, like, as perfect as you can possibly be. And if it wasn't what you wanted, then try and be perfect in the moment tomorrow or next time it comes up. But this idea that if I can just be a little bit better, if I can sing just a little bit better, or I can make a little bit more money, or I can do, like, all that stuff creates massive problems. And it displays a lack of vulnerability, bringing it all back around to this idea of being vulnerable and being open to, well, maybe that won't work. So what?
Right. Right. Well, in Francis, you and I, when we were both had the opportunity to work closely with Dave Ramsey's Entree Leadership Organization, there were two individuals, and frankly, Dave himself, who really understood the importance of vulnerability. Okay, and so I'll just touch on Dave here for a second, and then I'll go to Patrick Lencioni here in a moment. But Dave Ramsey, I believe, if he hadn't gone through what he had been through, right? So you think about for a moment, okay, here he's perceived by many as a financial guru and a financial expert,
Right.
but he shares with you the right amount of vulnerability. I mean, he says all the time, I got a PhD in DUMB, right? I made the dumbest
Right.
mistakes. And he talks about being stupid and I couldn't believe I thought this. But however, this is what I learned, and showing that vulnerability, because a lot of people would think to themselves, Dave, don't tell people about declaring bankruptcy. Dave, don't tell people about the millions of dollars you lost, because Dave, then that's a sign of weakness. You need to be
Right.
strong. You need to be this hero. But Dave's saying, no, no, no. I'm going to be vulnerable and share my experience, and then it actually gives people hope. And then
Right.
if you think of Patrick Lencioni, Patrick, when we spoke on stage with Patrick Lencioni, he's the same way. Like he was talking about the importance. I remember one time you talk about think about this example of vulnerability. He talked about the importance of running your home a certain way. And he said, he shared the story. If you'll remember, he shared the story. He said, I turned to my wife and said, if we ran our business the way we ran our home, we'd be bankrupt. What the point he was making was, listen, you need to have guiding principles in your home, just like you have guiding principles in your business that get you to where you want to be. But he shared in a moment of vulnerability, he's like, look, I'm not perfect at doing this in my house. But then he shared what he learned and how we did to get there. And so everyone
Right.
wants to show the final product, but no one wants to show the vulnerability or the challenges that they had on the way up to get where they are.
Right, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier. There's two types of people: those people that think that they're going to think that Dave Ramsey is an idiot, and how could he have lost all that money? And then there are those that say, "Oh, that's relatable. I
Hmm.
may not have gone bankrupt, but I have wasted money or I've missed opportunities, and he's succeeded, and so I can too." That first group, you don't want anything to do
Right.
with that group. You don't. If someone's going to be critical because you're owning your mistakes, well, then that's not someone you want to have in your life anyway. And they're not being vulnerable at all because they've made mistakes, right? This idea that somehow we have to put on this perfect persona is a massive problem. And so when we talk about that with this group and this idea, with our academy that we run, the idea that somehow I can't admit that I don't understand or I don't know or that I'm not getting it or that I failed, like that is the biggest hindrance to their success, to anyone's success. I look back at my failures. Number one is a lack of vulnerability. I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted to, well, I don't want to take a risk. I don't want to put myself out there. Doesn't
And
work.
and and so how do you overcome that? How do you combat that in a world that people believe they need to be perfect? Right? And France, you and I know nobody's perfect. So it just makes you unrelatable. It makes you
Right.
unrelatable. But you want to be the best version of yourself. So how do
Right.
you show the right amount of vulnerability? Because I do believe, and Francis, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but I do believe vulnerability is a lot like salt, meaning there's a
Hmm.
right amount of vulnerability that you should share, right? Because sometimes but
Well,
we always know those individuals, Francis, that share too much, right? And
yeah.
so
And
you have to be careful.
yeah, I want to be clear when we talk about vulnerability, we're talking about a part of being vulnerable. And so we want to, if we look at big picture, but yes, of course, oversharing and oversaturating, it becomes, it's not really being
Hmm.
vulnerable, right? If I'm going on and on and on about this thing, then what happened? Like, I'm not really being vulnerable anymore. I'm seeking that. I'm trying to draw that and I'm just manipulating people into, responding like, we both know of individuals that will go on social media and say, "Oh, it's a day. I don't know I don't know what I'm going to do."
Right.
And why are they saying that? They're saying it because they want "Oh, you're so fantastic. You're so great. Please help me. If there's anything I can do." Like they're fishing, right? It's manipulation. Like they're not really being vulnerable. That's a
Oh,
vulnerability.
okay. So you're
And
saying
so
you're saying that there's a fine line between vulnerability and manipulation.
I think there is, but I also want to make sure that we emphasize that we're not just talking about the things that we say. Vulnerability is everything that we do. It's having the courage to step outside of what is comfortable. And so sometimes that means owning those mistakes, but it also means maybe taking a job or not taking a job. A couple of years ago, I was working at a job. It was my dream job. Like I loved it. And I had flexibility. I worked from home. I could come and go as I pleased as long as I did my work. I got to travel some. I worked with amazing people. I made good money. And a buddy of mine called me and said, "Hey, any chance you want to come over and work for this company?" And he said, "The only problem is this is what the pay is." And I'm like, "Well, that's the same pay as I'm making now." And he's like, "Well, in full transparency, the company's kind of a mess. That's why we need you." And so I'm like, "Well, you're not selling the job real well." And so I said, "Well, I'm not really interested in making a change right now." And he called me back an hour later. He says, "My boss really wants you," because I'd worked for her as well. He said, "He really wants you." So he offered quite a bit more money. And I was like, "All right, now I need to think about this." And I made a commitment a long time ago. I refuse to shy away from something because I'm afraid that it won't work. I'm not going to I'll turn a job down if it's not a good fit, if I don't like the people or the mission or the process or whatever. That's fine. But if my only reason for not taking that new job is because I'm afraid that it might not work. When he said to me, "Well, listen, let's look at the industry is a little bit tough and our processes are broken and we need training and that's why we need you to come in because we need you to coach these people up, but it might not work. And so I don't know if we're going to be here 5 years from now." I'm like, the only reason I'm going to say no is because I'm afraid of taking that risk. That is not a good enough reason for me to turn the job down. Now, I'm not saying flaunt and fly in the face of it, but I determined the only reason I was considering saying no was because I was afraid. I'm like, I can't do it. I can't do it. the reason I say no has to be because I love the job I'm at so much that I could never consider leaving. But if that wasn't even in my mind, my only thing was the risk. I got to reconsider. I got to rethink that. I need to be vulnerable. I need to be willing to take a chance, right? And so that brings me to the job I'm at now. It's been a couple of years, and that brings me to here with you doing this amazing stuff. Like I'm just not. I don't want to live in a world where I'm afraid to try new things. Again, it may not make sense to do those things, and that's fine. Don't do things that don't make
Right.
sense. I'm not advocating to do dumb stuff. But if the only reason you're not going to do it is because you're afraid that it might not work, or you're afraid of working with new people, or trying something brand new, man, that's rough. Like that's a rough way to live your
Well, and
life.
that's interesting you bring that up because you refuse, you said you refuse to shy away from things that scare you. Or in essence, you're saying, Francis, I'm not going to let fear govern my behavior. Period.
Right.
I'm not going to let fear do that. Now, with that being said, that vulnerability and fear go hand in hand, right?
Oh yeah.
Because people that live in a fearful state are also those not willing to be vulnerable either
Right.
because they don't want to say
Right.
I don't know. And
Right.
but the reality is if you don't know and then you say I don't know, you can have people step up and guide you.
Right.
You and I are very familiar with a former CEO of a large company who would never be vulnerable. Never.
Right.
And the irony is, and many of you listeners have heard me share this before, the number one characteristic of the top 700 CEOs in America is excuse me, self-awareness. And self-awareness contributes to that vulnerability, right? Because you're saying, okay, I don't know this. I'm not sure what to do here. I need to be vulnerable enough and not fearful and invite others in to help and get me to where I need to be. And so
Yeah.
understanding fear and vulnerability, Francis, if you can understand those two principles, wow, you can go crush it in this world.
Yeah. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I mean, in this, I still struggle sometimes, like anybody else, like human emotions, right? But when I can take a moment and step outside myself and say, okay, where is this coming from? And what can I do? Like, what can I do to combat this? Like, what is the reason behind this? Because again, not everything that you are going to try or are being asked to do makes sense. Like, it doesn't. Like, we're not saying do dumb stuff. This isn't Yes Man, right? The movie with Jim Carrey where he was challenged to say yes to everything, and this isn't that. I'm not saying you should say yes to
Right.
everything. I'm just saying don't let fear govern the decisions that you make. And be willing to take those risks if the risks make sense, right? I had a different opportunity with another guy that we both know. He works for a Bitcoin company, a company that processes. They aren't a Bitcoin company, but you can store your Bitcoin there and you can spend it on like a debit card and stuff. And I don't really understand Bitcoin that much. Being vulnerable, I don't really get it, and so I don't really understand how it all works. And so I did some research. He was going to pay me a lot of money, and I remember thinking, I just don't understand the industry. I don't trust the industry. I don't know enough about this. And so I said no. But I didn't do it because I was afraid that I might not succeed in the job. Did it because I just didn't feel comfortable with that particular industry. And as it turns out, the job wouldn't exist anymore if I had taken it. It just, the, this didn't work out. Right. And so there's just being willing to acknowledge and have that conversation in your head. Why am I really doing this? You know, one of the principles we teach in academy when we're talking about setting goals is the five
Right.
whys, right? It's like, what is it you want to accomplish? Well, I want to lose weight. Why? Well, because I want to be healthier. Why? Because I want to be able to spend time with my grandkids. I want to be able to play and not run out of breath. Well, why? Well, because I want to be around, like getting to the real. I want to be around to make an impact on my children and my grandchildren. That's much different than losing weight. Like
Right.
that's a much different goal. I want to lose 15 pounds. Well, why? I want to make an impact. How can I make an impact? I can be
Mm.
healthier. That's different than losing
Oh
weight,
yeah.
right? And that's more sustainable, it's more longer lasting, and it's more vulnerable. And so vulnerability underlies all this stuff. One of my favorite speakers is Brene Brown, and Brene Brown has championed vulnerability. I don't know of any other motivational speakers that have a Netflix special. You have comedians that have Netflix specials, but Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown, she is fantastic. And she said, without vulnerability, you can't have true love, you can't have courage, you can't have faith, you can't have any of that without
Right.
vulnerability. Because if you're not willing to be like, I don't know, what's going to happen if I do this? If we won't make a move unless we know for sure what's going to happen, we're going to miss out on an awful lot.
Well, you think about everything that you do, going back to getting married, having children, all those things. You don't know how your kid. I mean, I have children that I feel like that are just like me, and I have children that I'm like, wow, that I don't even.
Whose child is that?
Right? It's just you just don't know. But the rewards are massive. Any risk that I have taken when I've really gotten clear on what I wanted, Francis, and I've demonstrated some level of vulnerability, it's amazing the payoff. It's amazing the payoff that comes with vulnerability. And I love what you said, though, that being vulnerable and being manipulative, or leveraging manipulation, are two different things. Because I would guess people listening, Francis, are fearful of being vulnerable because they've seen people on Facebook that are manipulative, and they're like, I don't want to
Right.
be that. I don't want to do that.
Right. Yeah, and part of it's that it's self-awareness. It's that internal, like being like it sounds dumb, but it being vulnerable shows your vulnerability, right? And so when you go and when you do and say things like that, it ceases to be about vulnerability, and it's more about trying to bring people into what you're doing. You asked a question early on, like, well, how do we do this? And one of the things is you really just you have to be open to the idea, but you just need to be willing to not be the smartest person, to not be the best looking or the best dressed or to drive the nicest car or whatever. Now, if that's important to you and that's a manifestation, like I get that's fine. But the vulnerability is where we really see that growth, right? And so I get someone wanting to err on the side of I don't want to manipulate, so I'm not going to be vulnerable. But that's a lack of vulnerability, right? I mean, you got to trust people,
Right.
right? And I mentioned this before. I went to some self help stuff a number of years ago because I was really struggling. And one of the things that I learned is this idea of this manipulation thing, and I didn't ever view it as manipulation. So I would I text my buddy Dan. Dan. And so I would text Dan and I would say, hey, Dan, do you guys want to go out this weekend? If you're busy, it's no big deal. We can go another time. And I thought I'm just being a good guy. I am letting them know that I'm not going to be hurt if they can't go
Right.
out. I'm not going to be upset. I just like I'm letting them. I'm just being a good. I'm letting them know I'm letting them off the hook if they can't do it. And what I learned was I was manipulating them. And why can't I just say, hey, Dan, you guys want to go out this weekend? And
Right.
trust that Dan and Shannon are mature adults. And if they can't go, they will say they can't go. And Francis, as another mature adult, will say, I guess they couldn't go. Not assume they don't want to go.
Right.
Right. So I never viewed it as manipulation. And it's not the worst form of manipulation, but for me, it was in terms of like, just let people be adults. Like, hey, can you come and help me put in my sprinklers?
Right.
That's it. That's it. If they can't say no, if they feel like they have to because they're going to hurt my feelings, I can't control that. I can't control that. But I'm not going to write, but if you're too busy or you can't do it, if you got something else planned, don't worry about it. I'll be
Right.
okay. Like that's why. Why add that? There's no reason to
I
add that.
love that.
That is I am closing off any other stuff. And true friends, true people that you know and love you, we like, oh man, I wish I could help, but I'm out of town this weekend. Or I just don't have my back's bad or whatever the reason is, right? Or even if they're making it up, who
Right.
cares?
But the reality is what you just shared there, Francis, that's pure gold. Just be direct and be clear in your messaging. And that's when you head on over into that manipulative category. You
Right.
start muddying the waters, and then it just makes everything weird.
Yeah. I also had a mentor that like it was Elizabeth again that said that the word but, but, not behind, but but is the four-letter word of
Right.
vulnerability, right? Hey Chad, do you want to hang out this weekend? Oh, I'd like to, but I'm busy. Like, how about I'd like to, and let's find a different
Yeah.
time.
Perfect.
So if I say to you, "Hey, let's hang out," and you say, "Man, I'd like to, but I'm so busy," that's the end of it. Like it closes off all possibility. We're done talking. There's no more conversation to have. And because let's say you're in town and I want to see you, and you're like, "I'd like to. I've got something going on. Let's see. How about we look for this, or how about we try something this, or I'm going to be in town again in a few weeks, or whatever, you know." But this idea of the word "but," it closes off any possibility of anything. And so that to me was a big lesson as well, and this idea of kind of being vulnerable to what that might look like.
Yeah, and you know what? I've shared with you before and shared with the listeners. My nephew, Hiram Bourne, is exceptionally successful young man. He's in his early 20s, right? And what I believe, the very principles we're talking about here have propelled him to tremendous success. We were having lunch a couple of months ago, and I was sitting down talking to him, and the way that he approached. Now, when we think of nonverbal communication, in communication, we've been talking about mostly verbal, but the
Yeah.
nonverbal vulnerability is also massive as well. And when I sat down with lunch with Hiram, his approach to, you know what, I just want everyone else to be successful. You know what, I've made so many mistakes, but I'm learning. And he approached it in such a vulnerable way. In my mind, his nonverbal, his verbal communication was so vulnerable with just the right amount of vulnerability. I was like, now I know why so many people want to follow you. Now I want know why so many people want to work with you. He doesn't stand up there. In fact, he just bought a new sports car, and it's a nice
Uh-huh.
car. He didn't spend 100,000 or 150. He spent a lot more for it than that, right? And he pulled up and he shared with me this story. He pulled up and the end of it, someone said, "Whoa, where did you get that car?" Right? And Hiram's response was, "It's not the car that matters, it's the person that's in it." Right? And so
Yeah.
he immediately I mean, because he could have easily have said, "Well, you know what, when you're good," right? But he kept it real. And so I guess vulnerability, Francis, if we were to summarize here in these last few minutes, vulnerability is keeping it real and
Oh
people
yeah.
feel it.
Yeah, they like listen, and you want to surround yourself with the right kind of people as well. Because if you're surrounding yourself with the wrong kind of people, we've all seen movies and TV shows about the hero or the heroine who is kind of picked on, and so they kind of latch onto the wrong crowd. And like this idea, like you have to be able to trust the people that you're being
Right.
vulnerable with. And that makes a big difference. You know, Brene Brown talks about this idea of trust in a marble jar, and her daughter had a problem at school, and she was really frustrated, and she said to her daughter, like, "Listen, sweetie, you really need to trust. You can only confide in people that you trust." And think about trust as every time someone does something, you put a marble in a jar, and you only trust people that have marbles in their jar. And she said to her daughter, "I did. These two girls, they have marbles." And she's like, "Well, what is it? How did they get marbles in your jar?" "Well, one of them knew I was sick, so her mom texted you to ask how I was. And another one, I walked into the lunchroom and there wasn't very much room, so she slid over and she had a seat next to me, saved a seat for me, and so I had a place to sit." And Brene Brown's like, people think that trust is built through these
Mm.
massive, big things, and that leaders and people can just come in at the last minute and say, "Trust me, you're going to be okay." The trust is built by the little things. It's trust by a manager saying, "Hey, how's your wife
Right.
doing?" It's how'd your son's concert go? How was your weekend? That's where the trust is built up. And those are the people you want to associate with, not the people that only talk to you when they have something they need from you.
Love that. I absolutely love that. Vulnerability. Think really closely and evaluate yourself. That self awareness piece that we've talked about, Francis, that how vulnerable are you being? Are you putting yourself out there enough? And I would submit that you're not, and challenge
Right.
everyone listening to the podcast, put yourself out there and watch what happens.
Because we aren't
Right.
either. We're not putting ourselves out enough
We
either. Like it's constant evolving.
Always evolving. Francis, always great to be with you. And we'll all
Awesome.
work on being more vulnerable. Take care. Bye now.
Thanks.